Is something that is 10 years old a good thing or a bad thing? Well, if it is aged, cured cheese, then maybe good. If it is tech, then maybe not. If it's a human being, then it is absolutely one of the best years of your life. But what if it's a motorcycle that's disguising itself to be a new one, but is a decade old in most regards? Well, then the answer to that question is a bit tricky. So let me unravel the mystery that is the Bajaj Pulsar NS400Z by taking it on the Acro Drive 500 kilometers endurance test. .373cc single-cylinder liquid-cooled engine madness began in 2013 with the KTM 390 Duke, the original one. And still a decade later, that hasn't made it over to the Bajaj bikes. So you at least hope that the fuel efficiency would be better, right? But that's not quite the case, because out on the highway, the motor is sitting at 110 kmph with a 100 kilo rider. This bike returned 22 to 24 kilometers to the liter, which is not quite great. And couple that with an extremely small tank for 2024 standards, you're looking at a range figure of just over 200 kilometers. And there is another issue with the low fuel warning signs, which I'll get to in the features section.
Things aren't that great for the Pulsar in the city as well. The motor has to be ridden a little spiritedly, and hence 24.85 kmpl is a reasonable score, but not a great one.
Even during the thrill-seeking portion of our test, where fuel efficiency doesn't play that big a role, the Pulsar just managed to deliver a little under 20 kilometers to the liter, which is a little low score for two primary reasons. Firstly, friends who've owned the original 390 Duke, well, they managed to generate better fuel efficiency from their bikes on similar fun rides. And more so, the testing conditions on the day when we tested this bike were in the absolute wet, so speediness wasn't that high. So this bike doesn't turn out to be quite as frugal. Now this motor does have a lively spirit as it spools up rather rapidly, and the 35Nm does begin to excite you, especially if you're stepping up from a 160-180cc motorcycle. However, this excitement sort of fades away rather rapidly, and you tend to start finding not quite as exciting in a couple of years of time. For instance, when you are out on the highway, the motor was happily able to sit at 110 kmph, and that's a sizable jump if you are upgrading from those bikes onto this 40 bhp motorcycle. However, it feels that it is programmed to sit at those speeds and doesn't give you that wicked thought of maybe, just maybe, push a little further. And when you do decide to push this bike, there is a big limiting factor that became instantly apparent on the run, and especially in the rains. Head to this timestamp to know what that is.
So out on the highway, the Pulsar will sit happily at 110 kmph, and a quick overtake will need a downshift. Anything faster and the vibrations start to become bothersome. Speaking of which, our current test bike seems to have the harsh vibes in better control than what we tested earlier. At lower revs, the buzziness is not quite as apparent, and commuting is rather less taxing, which is great because the rains sure did cause a wreck for us during the run.
And its city mannerisms aren't that great either. Yes, it is a tad bit more tractable than the Dominar with which this bike shares its engine tune, but still the Pulsar needs you to keep the motor in the right zone for it to be moving, and that means working the gearbox a fair bit. Anything below 3000 RPM and the engine will shudder and might even come to a dead halt. Between 3 and 4,500 RPM, the bike moves along calmly and slowly, and it is only post 5,000 RPM where this motor comes alive. So you need to keep the motor in the right zone, and for that you can't leave the bike in third gear at low speeds and chug along. And even sometimes it forced me to go down to the first gear for some really tight, tricky spots.
We can't comment much about the engine heat as the run was conducted on a cool rainy day in Pune. But having experienced several iterations of the 373cc engine in various bikes where the thermal efficiency has become better over time, the Pulsar's motor should be maintaining its cool well on even the hottest of days.
At 807 mm, not many riders will find the seat height to be too tall, and since the midsection of this bike is not too wide, flat footing it with both feet is rather simple. However, taller or larger riders will find the lower body posture to be a little cramped. This might not be an issue on smaller trips or shorter commutes, but on long days in the saddle, this will definitely tend to cause some aches.
We did find this to be a similar issue on the new 390 Duke, which sort of got rectified with a taller 820mm seat, but there's no fix as such for the Pulsar. Thankfully, there's room in the saddle to move around and get a little more comfy. The saddle itself is pretty well cushioned and one can spend an entire tankful quite easily at a stretch. For a pillion, the seating space is a bit on the taller side, but reasonably comfy for commutes or small weekend stints. Not that advisable for long hauls.
Now this is definitely one of the softly sprung Pulsars in the market. So over the small bumps or regular imperfections or even the larger ones, this can absorb them and stays flat over most of them. The only thing that really unsettles this bike are the sharp ones, the ones that you find on state highways or on narrow city streets, where this bike tends to bottom out, especially with my 100 kg frame, and then it sends a thud back up to the rider, which can be a bit painful, but nowhere close to being as jarring as the Dominar. But we expected that the step up in suspension sophistication that Bajaj showed with the Triumph 400cc bikes as well as the new KTM 390 Duke to be felt here as well. But hey, since this bike is built to a price, such compromises should be expected. A Pulsar, and that too an NS family member, not being a great handler? Well, that can't be true, right? Well, yes, that's mostly true, because this is unlike any other NS series of Pulsars, because up until now the true potential, true brilliance of this perimeter frame has been shown on the NS200, but on this 400 it sort of feels like there is a lot of work required to get to the fun zone. You have to put in that much more effort when you're chasing cornering fun, and it doesn't like to be flicked from one side to the other, and it doesn't do so also in a rather rapid manner. And perhaps that's something down to the fact that this frame is derived from the Dominar and not a Pulsar, and that's why you get the sense that the DNA of a power cruiser is filtering through and not a street fighter. And what makes matters worse are the tires. Remember the limiting factor I was talking to you about earlier? Yep, that's these shoes. Now Bajaj's cost-conscious approach sees the 400 employ some non-radial rubber which do not seem to hold up to the bike's capabilities and don't manage themselves well in the dry. And in the rains, it takes a lot of mindfulness to keep the bike on the right path. Now this could have been avoidable right at the start if Bajaj had equipped this bike with some grippy tires like the TVS Pro Torx or the Seat Sportrads. And if you do end up buying this bike, I suggest you upgrade the tires almost immediately the moment you ride out of the showroom.
Stopping performance is adequate for the performance at hand, and it doesn't get subdued that much even under serious braking. Yes, the bike could have been a bit more fierce, but again, a pair of better tires could help in making the slowing down process a lot quicker and more stable.
In the early 2000s, the Pulsar stood for modern tech and innovation. In the 2010s, it lost it all to the KTMs. And things don't seem to be improving for the brand in 2020s as well. Sure, this motorcycle is getting all LED lighting, ride-by-wire, riding modes, traction control, smartphone connectivity, turn-by-turn navigation, music controls, USB charging, and a whole lot more. But all of these features were available on bikes 6 or 7 years ago. And even the final execution on the Pulsar NS400Z, well, that's not really intuitive enough. Take the riding modes feature for instance. Are we glad that it's there? Yes, because there is good in there that allows the rider to alter the electronics based on the riding experience or the weather conditions. Is it easy to toggle the modes on the fly? Well, no, because in order to even access the menu, you have to be at really crawling speeds with the throttle shut to access that. And yet, if you select the riding modes option as one of your quick selectors, you can access that menu in an instant, provided you still have the throttle shut, but the speeds don't matter then. That sort of beats the whole complex safety mechanism in the first place.
Then there's the screen itself. The negative LCD part is well lit but quite cluttered, but still legible. The dot matrix is just poorly executed and very limited data is displayed on the go. The low fuel warning comes up almost too early with nearly a quarter of the tank still left. Plus, toggling through the dot matrix screen requires extra effort as the buttons aren't tactile enough to respond quickly. So if you have to use turn-by-turn navigation, which is a whole long process in itself, or use music controls, it will be a bit of an exercise and a sort of a distraction to the actual riding experience. Bajaj products have become far better than previous years, but this NS is again a step back. It is not as shabby as the older 200s and 160s, but we expected the NS400Z to follow the trend and emulate the N250, especially with the plastic, switches and fitment department.
While small technical glitches can plague any motorcycle, we had the horn and even the rear right turn indicator fail on us during the test. Now, small irritants like this should not be expected on a motorcycle sold in 2024. But let's hope that this is a one-off issue and not a regular occurrence. Now, one of the super benefits of the Pulsar NS400Z making use of available parts and tech that is almost a decade old is that it allowed Bajaj to price the bike really well. I mean, rupees 1.85 lakh for a 400cc bike. That's exactly what the asking price of the KTM 390 Duke was in 2013. So you're certainly getting a lot of motorcycle for that price. And it sort of gives potential buyers of the Suzuki Gixxer 250, Yamaha MT-15 and even the Hero Charisma XMR a little bit extra to think about before they make their final purchase decision. But the biggest drawback here is that this bike does not elevate the Pulsar brand to new heights. Yes, this is definitely the biggest Pulsar yet and is perhaps the most affordable way to bring home a 400cc motorcycle. It does not excite you like the previous flagship Pulsars of the past, but what it does is that it brings that performance quite accessible to the masses, a trait which made the Pulsar brand quite a heartthrob amongst millions of bikers. But does it still excite the enthusiast in you or keep that flame of desirability burning for endless time? Well, not quite. Because the old Pulsars, well, they were the torch bearers, the flag bearers of performance motorcycles in India, which the brand as such is no longer. And that's a really sad place. So what do you think about the Pulsar NS400Z? Do let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and share this video, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell notification icon, follow us on our Instagram page because we bring cool, techie, automotive content over there as well. And before I end this video, please always wear riding gear on all your rides.